Tantra always opens itself to those who are seeking. Your body right here and now is the divine. You don't need to wait till the afterlife to experience the divine. It's right here in your cells and in this body and in this moment and in your relationship and in your every breath and in your every step that you take.
We are presented with something as beautiful as Tantra. This thing is a form of liberation from the shackles and the pains of this life of the mind, this life of fear, this life of worry.
This path seemed to be about actually dissolving the separation between self and other and godliness, and we can experience deep consciousness when we do that.
Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life, so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this.
Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. And today I'm going to talk about a topic that I haven't really talked about much on the podcast, apart from maybe a couple of episodes back. But Tantra, I have the wonderful Henika in, and we are talking about, I've just recorded it, so it's wonderful. We're talking really about what you might call authentic Tantra or classical Tantra. Really get into the origins of Tantra, where it came from, who it was for. We really dive deep into that from Henika's wonderful knowledge, from running the School of Sensual Arts. And we really just weave in and out through a conversation. We talk about ritual and the importance of ritual and how that shows up in our daily life and how that's, used to really direct power. We touch on the importance of sexual energy and creativity and how they're so linked, and how you can cultivate more sexual energy through your creativity as well. We talk a lot about the meaning behind the gods and the goddesses in Tantra, and it's worth really listening to this part quite closely, because this is one thing that Neo-Tantra doesn't really go near or touch, is the gods and goddesses and their meaning, and how we can embody those gods and goddesses in our own lives, right? And we also dive in a lot about how Tantra is really a spiritual path for growth and expansion, and how you can use very simple practices to expand your mind, expand your being, expand your experience of being alive, and enjoying the life that here and now that's with you. And we touch on really the difference between kind of takeaway sex and sensual and deep intimacy. And that's a really beautiful part of the conversation, because I think this is something that we really struggle with. And I see this with the men that I work with who are, having some sort of challenges or difficulties sexually. It's actually, how do we start to elevate the sexual experiences we're having, so that our partnerships or the people we're sleeping with are really having a beautiful experience, and that elevates us well beyond the average person. So this is a really juicy episode, really just lovely to listen to, lovely to be part of. I love to talk about Tantra, especially if it's not just solely about sex and sexuality, because there's so much more to Tantra than that. But without further ado, I'll let you jump into the episode. Listeners, I'm back with another episode, of course, because you're listening to the episode, but I'm here with a guest who I have followed for, I reckon, almost as long as I've been on Instagram, actually. It could be 4-5 years that we have been connected and followed each other and watched each other's grow and do various different things. And someone who I really admire the work that she does, because it goes past our superficial understanding of the topic we're probably going to touch on today, because I think in the West we have a very superficial understanding of the topic, and we're leaving it a bit of a mystery. topic that we're going to talk about most likely today, because we can only see as far as we can see. We don't get any further. We don't get to the real juice and the real depth that's really possible from the topic we're about to talk about today. And I welcome Henika. How are you doing today?
Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me on here. And yeah, it's been several years that we've been connected, and it's been amazing to witness your journey as well and your growth and everything that you're creating. So I'm really excited to be here and to be speaking to your audience too.
So I always like to ask my guests about their journey, and I know a little bit about yours. You were formerly in the world of law, and you now find yourself in a very different world. So what was your journey to do the work that you do today?
So, yeah, I mean, I started, as a lot of us do in education, training my brain to the point where I only trained my brain and went on to study law in English and French. I don't know why, 2 languages, 2 legal systems, 2 countries. And I then went on to work in said field and realized that once I had checked off all the boxes that I thought were going to make me happy, like the education, the job, the apartment, the partner, the status, all of these things that kind of logically in the mind made sense, that I was actually deeply, deeply unfulfilled. And more than that, the first indication to me that something was off or wrong was in an encounter that I had with my then partner, where I realized that my pelvis was numb. And I was like, I can't feel this anymore. Or have I ever been able to feel it? And this is pre-Instagram days where you can find so much wonderful information. So I put into Google how to cure a numb vagina, actually, because that's what I thought it was called then as well. And there were no answers apart from like Cosmo. And I tried to start the conversation with some friends, and they were sort of like, not sure what's going on there. And to be honest, I just felt really alone with it, and like something was really wrong with me. And I really started to lose hope. And I thought, I'm never going to feel again, like I'm never going to dance again. That was quite scary. And I realized that in all the many, many years of training my brain, I had completely disconnected from my body. And that's because there was a lot of grief that I hadn't processed from my teen years, that I perhaps during that time didn't have the tools to process. So natural escape is to move to the mind and to stay there and stay where you get rewarded and feel sparks in your mind when you learn something. But I realized I was really, really needing more than that. And so that set me off on this quite long journey. I was living in China at that time, so I was coming into contact with Taoism and energy practices, and I actually quit my job. It was the scariest thing that I've ever done. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I have got a lot of questions, and I'm looking for the answers that my Western education could not give me in all the years that I spent studying. So I returned to India, where I'm from. I'm a first-generation British Indian woman. So I grew up with a lot of rituals in my home. My family have moved from Uganda to the UK and from India to France to the UK. So we've got quite a lot of migration patterns in one generation. And our rituals were one thing that stayed the same for us throughout. So I grew up with the goddesses in my home and my grandmother chanting mantras and all of that stuff. And somehow my questions led me back to those experiences, because when you grow up in a culture where it just happens, like you're just around these rituals, nobody kind of knows why they're doing them. We just do them. And even when I went back to ask my parents and my aunties, and my dad used to be a monk, and even then it's like we didn't really know why we were doing them. And that's the thing about Eastern spirituality. It's not from the mind. It's not a why practice. It's a body practice. So you do the practice, you feel the effect in your body, and you if it works for you, you continue to do it, and if you don't, you don't. But yeah, I was trying to bring my mind into it, intellectualize the whole process. So that led me to just really dive deeply into the history of yoga, the history of Tantra. And I realized that what I grew up seeing was the lineage of Tantra. So it was really this aha moment, a really big returning. And within that, I dabbled in neo-tantra and the different forms of tantra and how, when we hear that word, what we think of it in the West. And I've also explored the traditional kind of white tantra and the yogic tantra as well. So it's been quite a winding journey. And I started writing about my experiences when I was exploring them. And I started to perhaps in my aloneness, I started writing about them. And I realized that there were other people out there who were maybe experiencing something similar or were looking for similar tools. And that's really when the School of Sensual Arts was born, as a place to share the tools that I was learning and, to become a space for us to feel less alone in our journey and to provide community to share these really taboo subjects that are sometimes really difficult to talk about, even with our friends, even with our partners. So that's how I got here.
Wow. And it's so beautiful because you only describe ritual. Like, I think I was learning about ritual a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I remember I was in a class and we learned about ritual for about, 2 hours. Maybe it was 2 or 3 classes. And then I started to see the world really differently. I started to observe, there's rituals everywhere. They're always occurring and we don't really think about them. We don't consider them. And I remember watching the coronation of King Charles and how from when his mother passed away and just watching everything that happened, I was like, this is a huge, long, intricate ritual to point us, our energy in this direction of this new person they're now decreeing to us who's important. It's very interesting to observe how, the ritual is focusing some intention or some energy to be directed in some way. When we look at these little rituals, or not so little, when we look at the coronation, you're like, wow, this whole thing, like in essence, what I really observe is in essence, this person is just a person and this person that passed away is just a person. But the whole ritual gives us this sense of grandeur that this person is powerful and important. And we kind of overlook the power of ritual in general, of rituals in our daily lives, but also on the kind of grander scale for the more important aspects of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that I really loved when I came to learn more about the Tantric path, because it's a path which gives the power of ritual, which was once in the hands of the elevated spiritual caste. So I'm kind of reflecting that back to what you're saying about monarchy and ritual and how we only really see it there. And what Tantra did when it came about in its conception is it said, actually, this is a path for the everyday householder. So we're going to offer rituals for all important aspects of life. We're going to offer rituals so you know what to do when death occurs. We're going to offer rituals for you to do when sex occurs. We're going to offer you rituals when you wake up and you greet the sun. We're going to offer you rituals for when the moon is full and when the sky is dark. We're going to offer you rituals for every turn of the season so that you just know what you're doing. And, when the mind starts to come into play, actually, there is this system in place that carries you. And there's so much, I find that there's so much grounding and so much peace in that, and forming your own rituals as well. Yeah.
And you started to touch on something there I'd love to talk a bit more about, is like the origins of Tantra, because it has some really interesting origins from my readings. I'd love to hear because I imagine you've studied way beyond where I have got to, but there's some interesting origins of where Tantra came from and how it kind of came about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tantra is such a wide-ranging word. There's the Tantras, which are a set of texts, and there's Tantra, which is a concept, and there's the etymological translation of Tantra as a method of expansion or a way to weave weave different practices that were happening at the time in the lands, or also a way to weave different aspects of ourselves that we may accept or we may not accept. But from my understanding in the history of Tantra, it really emerged from the outskirts of society. So as I mentioned just now, Eastern spiritual practices, due to the caste system, were really reserved for those who were in the Brahmin caste, which means that you are born into that caste and your purpose in society is to conduct spiritual ceremonies, learn shlokas, verses, and to help the transitions of people as they go through life, birth, death, weddings, all those things. And that meant that there are a lot of castes who could listen to those shlokas, and then there were also castes who were avarna, meaning outside of the caste system, and they're sometimes called the untouchables, which is really jarring actually when you think of that word, that you can't even touch those people. They can't drink the same water from the wells that you're drinking from. They can't come into the city where you're living, simply because of the family that they were born into. So Tantra really emerged as this counterculture system to the existing system that was in place. It came from the outskirts of society where cremation grounds were, where they wouldn't be allowed in the main city. And it came from these really incredible practices which draw out the deep repressions that we have in society. And for that reason, in the West, Tantra is known as a sex thing, but in India, it's known as a black magic thing because of the incredible energetic power you can actually gain, and which is sometimes misused by tantrikas in the black magic way, in India when that was coming around. So it sounds a bit juju, but it's just misunderstood across the board. So anyway, Tantra said, this is a practice for the everyday householder. Let's share these practices for everybody to do that, so that you don't have to renounce your life and go and live in a cave and never get married and not belong to a world of work. How can we actually bring these practices to serve people in the everyday, in their relationships, in their work, in their lives? And that's what I really love about it. But I'd love to learn if you've read anything else, or if you've I'd love to explore this.
My reading took me to the burial grounds piece and around like smearing themselves with ash and doing their rituals in burial grounds, because it was the only place they could find to kind of practice, and being on the outside of society. And as you said, this counterculture, almost like a rebellion to the existing system that only allowed the exalted few to really be able to practice. And I really love how it's like a counterculture. Like, imagine of all the different countercultures we now see in our lives now around the world that are like, fuck society and fuck their rules, and let's do something that's for the people, like you could argue like veganism, or some aspects of spirituality, or like all these things that are like going against how we have been taught to be and act and use these hierarchies of systems of power. And it's a movement to go, hey, fuck that. Let's do this. We can do this differently. Let's give power. That's it. Let's give power to the people, the real people who actually need the power.
Yeah, exactly that. And it turned everything on its head. Women were never allowed to share spiritual practices because our bodies were seen as impediments to spiritual growth. Whereas it actually said that women in our bodies and capacity to create, we're all creators regardless of what body we're in, but particularly bodies which are in these modes of cycles and creations are actually even more connected to the natural rhythms of the earth, and therefore even more naturally connected to the rhythms of the divine. And so it actually turned on its head this idea of ascending and trying to climb, the rungs of the afterlife and be born into a better and better and better thing, person, God, whatever you want to call it. Turned it on its head, and it actually said, your body right here and now is the divine, and you don't need to climb or wait till the afterlife to experience the divine. It's right here in your cells and in this body and in this moment and in your relationship and in your every breath and in your every step that you take. So I just love that. It is power. It is power to the people and it's power to our bodies, and it's power to so many people who have been suppressed or repressed in society. And that's why I think it continues to be this path which is so relevant today. Yeah.
Because there's so many spiritual paths and traditions. There's like a shunning of the body. The body is like impure, is like you said, an impediment to our spiritual growth. It's just a vessel that almost like it should be, we should basically keep it functionally working, but we shouldn't bring any pleasure, too much joy, too many ornaments, all these things we are like told to be keeping things very simple when it comes to our body, and just focus on the fact that we can get to this next rung or the afterlife. You know, I spent a lot of time in church as a young man, and I always felt like the worst con is like, if you're a good person now, when you die and you can't verify this thing, your life's going to be really good if you follow all these rules that we've given you. It always felt to me like, I don't like the sound of this. This feels like some sort of like trick that parents would do to children to keep them in, to keep them orderly and behaving well. But Tantra is like, the divine can be experienced now, in this moment, in this body you're in, and the world is a place for you to experience that. You don't have to shun anything as bad and wrong, but you can use what's here as a way to kind of grow in consciousness and elevate and expand your mind, your body, your being.
Yeah. And something that I really love about it too is that it's, you know, it says, okay, you can experience your heaven here in your body on earth, but you can also experience your hell. And it's not this path of love and light. It's very much this path of love and darkness, and how that too, like your anger and all the icky, yucky feelings that we don't like to experience, they're also a part of your spiritual experiencing itself in the body that you're in. So I love that, because it really, for me, is so real and so relevant, and is less about escaping or disconnecting from or bypassing. That can happen a lot in these spiritual paths, but it's more about going in and, as you know, feeling and being with and containing, being able to hold in this body the container of all depths and colors of our human depths of emotion and experiences. And I just love that.
And connecting to our our own divinity, you know. One of the things I come to learn about Tantra is the various gods and goddesses. And I can't remember the phrase for it now. It's like embodying that divine power within ourselves, which I imagine really goes against all of the mainstream religions, which is like God is outside of you. He's out there, or she, well, it's nearly always he's up there in the clouds. And like you made in his image, but you're not quite him. Whereas my experiences or my impressions of Tantra is like, it's that the godliness resides in us, with us as well.
Yeah, that was such a penny drop moment for me, honestly, when I realized that, because I grew up with lots, and my father was an artist before he was a monk, so I grew up with lots of like figures of the gods and the goddesses, and that was part of the ritual growing up. Every morning you sit in front of the gods and the goddesses, and they have their animals, and you put like raisins and almonds and cashews in front of them and water, and you light a candle, and you're actually creating this ritual for the elements. And I didn't really understand that then. And as I've gone on to study what we were actually doing and why we were doing them, I was realizing that those rituals allowed us to reflect the elements, through the elements, the godliness in the statues that we were seeing, reflecting that back into ourselves. So we see these beautiful figures which are adorned, and all of the gods and the goddesses have their own mythologies and qualities, and sitting with them, like, how they say you're the product of the 5 people that you spend the most time around. If you start your day and you're around Shiva, god of consciousness and rebellion and all of this incredible power. You're around your Parvati, this goddess of deep partnership and death, and also destruction as well. Another form of Kali. If you're with your Lakshmi, and she's this goddess of creativity and pleasure and joy and abundance, or if you're with your Saraswati and she invites you into this magnificence of the arts and you allow those to be your accompaniments, then they are sharing those qualities or showing you those qualities that already exist within yourself. So it's less about, as you said, placing those figures outside of you, but more about allowing them to be a mirror for what's already within. And allowing them to reflect back to you and just constantly remind you in a world that always reminds you otherwise, that you have it all within yourself. And I thought that was really beautiful. It was a real penny drop moment for me, because as you said, that's not often what we think of when we think of spiritual paths. There's always this like other. And this path seemed to be about actually dissolving the separation between self and other and godliness, and even in our relationships, dissolving that separation until we see everything as a reflection, right? As that mirror.
And those attributes there you described with the gods and goddesses, it's like those are things we really struggle to see in ourselves, and to acknowledge that we have those things, whether we have the deep consciousness, whether we have the capacity for destruction and death or transformation. Like we often struggle in a world that distracts us, especially in this modern world we now live in, is constantly distracting us with phones and little bits and pieces and flashing lights and videos and all sorts, that we actually really struggle to see these elements in ourselves. And I wonder, why do you feel that Tantra's become so popular in this last kind of, my time frame is like, it feels like it's been really popular in the last kind of 2 or 3 years. But for you, it might feel like it's longer, but it feels like has had a really, an explosion of interest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I just feel like more and more we're all part of change. We're all part of revolution. We're all part of these incredible shifts that are happening in our human world and our human experience. And I think particularly through the years of COVID, where we all had time to not move and be distracted, a lot of us started to realize what was happening in the world. And we had the BLM movement, which really, I think, gave rise to incredible shifts across different communities. Indigenous communities started speaking up around different things that were happening in their own communities. And this huge kind of, power, I think, was kind of unleashed. And I feel like Tantra always opens itself to those who are seeking difference, who are seeking change, who are seeking strength to go on their own path. And, I mentioned Shiva there, the figurehead of of Tantra. And if you see a figure of Shiva compared to a lot of the other different gods that you see, the other gods are often, adorned and dressed in their beautiful silk and have these nice chains around their necks, and they're holding their chicks. And Shiva is really different, because he doesn't live in a palace. He lives in, this is mythology, he lives in the Himalayas, and he is an ascetic. Like, he renounces all of that stuff. He doesn't need it. He's just doing his own thing, smothered in ash. He wears his hair in dreadlocks and now what is a fashionable man, top knot. But back then, when everyone's got their hair, all slathered in oil and everything has to be perfect, actually, he really stands out. And he, wears animal skin around his legs and his lingam, and he's just different. And I think he just reminds us that we can walk a path of difference and resistance and revolution. And deep consciousness, and we can experience deep consciousness when we do that. So I feel like that might be one of the maybe esoteric philosophical reasons why it's making this huge resurgence. And then I also think that, particularly in the West, where we've discussed a little bit religion and how the body has been seen as this impediment to spiritual growth, and how often sex has been demonized as also this impediment to spiritual growth or any growth, or you just, even if you're not grew up in a religious family, there's still a lot of shame in society, no matter what path or country or culture you're walking in. And actually, Tantra, because it is so revolutionary, it said, instead of saying this is right, this is wrong, we're just going to see everything as a part of the human experience in human life. And instead of allowing these really big energies inside of us to have control over us, we are going to offer tools and techniques for us to be able to harness, cultivate, and use this energy as what it identified after many, many years of deep meditation, one of the most powerful energies in our body, which you don't need to do hundreds of years of deep meditation to realize that your sexual energy is completely consuming. And it can be consuming in so many ways when it's there, when it's not there. It can really take a big chunk of your mental and physical energy. And so it said, okay, well, if you're not proactively procreating, then how else can you use this energy? And, if you've ever heard or seen, body work, and you see sexual energy as it starts to move through the body, it will start to find the cells, the organs, the knots, the tangles in the body where there are blocks and where there are tangles. And so it will use that high energy frequency to start to move and start to shift and to start to heal what's happening there. And it's not only in India and in Tantra that this is happening. I mentioned I live in China, and the practice of energy cultivation there is age old, and it was done for keeping emperors long and thriving and healthy for as long as possible. And there's also other cultures, as well. You see the belly dancing in the Middle East, and how, that was for fertility and to activate the fertility there. And you see that in tribes in Africa as well. Like, there is this deep, innate intuition, I think, in humans as to how we can cultivate our energy to heal. And that's in our bodies. So, yeah. I think I went on a tangent. Sorry.
No, because as I hear that, it's like we have this innate understanding that to cultivate energy and healing and transformation and change in our lives and in our communities, that our body is the vehicle. And in some cultures, it's singing and it's sound, and it's like through drum and through harmonic sound. And some cultures it's dance, and it's like rhythmical dancing that puts people into trances. And the body as this wonderful vehicle for like transformation and growth. And I always because when I think of this, I think of the like opposite of I think of Christianity, which is like the body is bad, sinful, bad body. And, we can quite easily say, well, obviously Christianity doesn't want us to find our own enlightenment for our own body, because they want to kind of have a monopoly over that, right? Because if you say, oh, you could just use your own body and do these practices, that kind of puts all these priests and so forth out of business, because ultimately, depending on your religious views, what my religious views is that religion basically is just really big business. And this beautiful way in which we can cultivate our sexual energy, our creative energy for our own transformation, to move that through our bodies. And as you said, that we live in a society that we struggle sexually, right? Because of the Abraham religions that most of us come up with. And we are presented with something as beautiful as Tantra, as like, this thing is a form of liberation from the shackles and the pains of not just modern day life, of this life of the mind, this life of fear, this life of worry, this life of looking to a fearful God who's looking to punish you every moment. And if someone gives you an opportunity to look at a set of practices or a path that is like filled with joy and darkness, but it comes through you, you're not looking for some other priest or head to teach you how to be and tell you what to do. It's a really attractive path for the modern day person, if they're willing to step outside of the box a bit, because Tantra can feel like you're stepping outside of the box a bit.
Yeah, yeah, it can. And I love what you said there. And there was this one teacher that I met in India last year who said 3 words that I think completely changed my worldview. You know, sometimes it's just a few words someone says and it stays with you. And we were sitting in satsang, which is like philosophical chats under coconut trees. And he said, freedom from what? What are we seeking freedom from when it's already here? We're already experiencing the divine as it is. What is liberation? What are you seeking to liberate from? Like, it's here. You're in it. You're in the body. You're sitting under this tree. We're all here. And I was like, yeah. You know, freedom from what? So sometimes when I feel myself going through periods of needing to escape, I say to myself, what am I? Freedom from what? Because for freedom to exist, there has to be an impression, or there has to be something that's taking that freedom. So freedom from what?
Yeah. I'm just really sitting with that, like freedom from what? If all around us and all our experience is divine, what are we trying to free ourselves from? What are we trying to escape from? And where are we trying to escape to? There isn't divine.
Yeah.
And it's just a shift in our perspective and how we decide to view what's occurring to us, the people around us, the world around us, that is not necessarily us to escape from the thing we're trying to escape from.
Yeah. I loved what you said earlier as well about, you said sexual energy and creative energy. And I'd love to chat a bit more about that, because I love the double-sided coin of sexuality and creativity. And I do find that as you start to cultivate more of your sexual energy, you just start to turn into an artist, whether you want it or not. Like, it's incredible. It's incredible what happens, because they are energy which creates. So if you're not using that energy again to procreate, it may start to manifest itself in your creations, and that might be literally what you might perceive to be art, like your painting or your music or dancing, and just really being there and really enjoying it. Not art with a view to sell it or for it to be good, or for it to be your profession, but art is this means of deep expression that I think is also a little bit repressed, I think, maybe for a lot of us. I sometimes feel that art, I feel like the same way the same way that we try to sometimes bring academics into creative subjects, and like, well, you can only pick up a pencil and draw if it's going to make you money, or or if someone says it's good, or if it's going to go on display. But what about just those quiet moments alone, and connecting back to one of the oldest forms of expression that ever existed, cave paintings on walls, and how that can actually really get into those unconscious parts of our minds and offer us so much soothing. I love that also about Tantra.
Because there's also like a growth in that, as I maybe I bring it into the mind, is if I've been telling myself that I'm not a creative person, and I'm someone who told himself I wasn't a creative person, right? If I then decide to make some music, for instance, or play an instrument, I start playing an instrument, I'm being faced with the story that I've been telling myself. And I have to almost wrestle with that story of like, oh, I'm playing this feels good, right? And I have to wrestle with the story I've told myself that this doesn't feel good to do this, or there's something wrong with this. I have to face the story. I have to really stand in front of it and almost not necessarily consciously analyze it, but just see whether, like, is this really true about me? And then if I'm playing the music and I'm making the music and I'm enjoying it and I feel it sounds good, and then face with another story I have of like, oh, does my opinion really matter about this? Like, do I need someone else to validate that I'm good at this, or this sounds good, for me to be able to feel that it is good? And like, just that simple act of allowing ourselves to cultivate our own creativity can be an incredible journey of not just joy and fun and playfulness, but also an experience of dissolving the blocks in our mind that have been holding us back.
Yeah, absolutely. It's another mirror. It's another mirror for us to experience ourselves as a creator, that really can take charge of whatever happens on the paper or whatever note you play. There's so much beauty in that, but also, the pain of all those past stories coming up and you hit the wrong note or you didn't point your foot perfectly or whatever it was. And I think it's really amazing because it also works in the reverse process, right? So working and cultivating your sexual energy invokes creativity, but also being with your creativity will also heighten your sexual energy as well, because you're becoming more involved with your senses, you're training your mind to be in your body and being able to focus on a certain thing. You're becoming aware of the reality that might be existing outside of yourself and the thoughts that might be existing inside of yourself. Creativity is a deeply sensual process that I think, flips itself back into sexual energy as well. Yeah.
Because I guess creativity it's a very felt experience. You feel your creativity, whether that is your painting, whether you're making music, whether you're drawing, whether you're writing. We don't think our creativity. All the creative masters in the world, they don't talk about the thinking process they go through. It's the feeling. And I guess that's even with art. It's like, what does it make us feel? Like, what's the feeling that's evoked from art? And when I talk of art, I don't just mean paintings and drawings. I mean dance. I mean still art, sculptures, like anything that we deem art, even words and writing we deem art. It's like, what does it make us feel? So it's always bringing us into this felt sense of the body where the feelings occur, and out of the mind, which we habitually find ourselves in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just this alchemist, I feel like. Whatever creative outlet you use, it's an alchemist. So it takes the emotions from the inside and it allows you to work through them and allow them to become a part of you outside, So I think some of the most beautiful pieces of art are filled with emotion and sometimes pain and love and all those really difficult to understand parts of human experience. And I think that, we just draw before we write. It's a deep returning, I think, to a time of not having to use the mind and being able to drop into limitless playfulness, which I think, also this path invites you back to. This quite childish, not in a bad way childish, but just playful and joyful and light. Because you can also sit with the dark and you can also sit with the pain. Both ways.
and as you say that there about kind of creativity and the playfulness and the joy, I'm kind of reminded of the work I often do with men. Is like, I'd noticed something with many of the men I work with is that they have no creative outlet in their life. They don't tap into creativity. They're often in jobs that require them to be in their mind and to be always thinking or always rationalizing everything happens. And they really struggle with this aspect of creativity, feelings, emotions, self-expression, and sexual energy. And I do find it quite fascinating that how those things kind of really, they kind of go together so tightly.
Yeah, they really do. They really, really do. And it's such a great way, I feel like, if, for example, if you're not ready to speak to someone else, if you don't even know what you need to speak to someone about, to actually just put a piece of pen to paper and just say, I'm not going to go back and read this. I'm just going to free write whatever words are going to come onto the page, and just to allow its outlet, its release, it's cathartic. And also if you're like, I just don't feel like doing that, you can also be in a state of receiving the senses, right? To go back into your body, to release from your mind, to understand different parts of yourself. So perhaps that's, just putting your headphones in and closing your eyes and actually being with the music, or I don't know, getting your hands in some clay and just mushing it around a bit, just anything that brings you back to your senses. And I think that's something that I really like about again about the tantric path is that it's less about watching the thoughts. There's this whole thing about, mindful, and it's almost this practice which has come to heal. I'm doing little asterisk marks, heal a busy mind, but it's called mindful, and those as words just don't make sense to me. Why would my mind be full? How is this going to help me? And why am I watching my thoughts when there's this 80 other % of my body that's also got a language? So I love more the idea of bringing your tool of meditation to your senses, and not even having to set a time each day to sit down and meditate, but to actually just be more present of your senses as you go through your day. I think that's how you bring spiritual practice into daily practice. Like, sit down and enjoy your morning coffee for 5 minutes, or your walk, and enjoy nature, or whatever it is, the taste, the touch, the smell, the sound. Make that the object of the meditation, and it's a lot easier to release the thoughts, or to be aware of the thoughts, when you have a different object other than the thoughts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. It brings us, because as you said, we have all these senses, we have this body that feels, and we can bring our awareness to, I could sit, at the moment I'm lucky enough I'm living by the sea, and I could sit and I could go to the beach and I could sit there and I could meditate on the sound of the sea and the sound of the birds and the sound of the people walking by, and just be with that sound and really deeply drop into that sound, the beautiful nature of it, almost not so much thinking, but like being with the intricate nature of the sound of the waves and the sea and the seagulls and all that. And that is a beautiful way, from what I'm hearing you say, is like a really beautiful way to bring ourselves into like presence in this moment. And then maybe even further on is like an embodied experience of the divine, which is all that is the sea, the nature, the humans, the sounds, the birds.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, every time that we use the senses as a tool of meditation, we start to dissolve that separation between the outer world and the inner world, because, even the act of eating, you're bringing the outside world into your inner world, and the tool, the vehicle of that is your taste. Or like you said, you're listening to nature, and the tool of that meditation is sound, and it's going from externally to internally. So you start to dissolve this separation, as the body is this impediment to growth, and you actually start to see it as this doorway, and there's two ways in. There's an in and there's an out. So yeah, it's great. We've got these 5 wonderful doorways. Yeah.
5 wonderful doorways. It was something you said, and I'm sorry. What I'm hearing there also is like a practice like that brings intimacy. When we always often think of intimacy, it's become a euphemism for the word sex, but I try to use the word intimacy as a term for closeness. I think that's more in line with what it really means. But with a practice like that, with the listening and the being with the sensations in the body, for instance, that helps us build a level of intimacy of ourselves. And intimacy is this thing we often are looking for outside of ourselves. And, predominantly my work is with men, and there's a desire for men often for intimacy through the lens of sex, and they wanting to get that from outside. There's a hunger that they feel. Do you feel that we're often lacking intimacy with us, with really who we are and ourselves and our bodies and our own senses?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of my favorite kind of essay topics in my mind to munch on every now and then, because I often think about, okay, well, what's the difference between sexual experience, like sexual intimacy, and sensual intimacy? And I think both have their place. I think both are incredible and both are fantastic. And I think sexual intimacy comes from, we have like different parts of our brain. We have like our animal brain, we have our like mammal brain, then we have our human brain. That's like how it's evolved. And I think sex comes from our sexual intimacy comes from this beautiful, wild, animalistic, like living on the lands, like wanting to satisfy that urge. And then you do it and you get your meal, but then it's over quite quickly, and then you're kind of hungry again, kind of like a fast food type thing. And then I think with sensual intimacy, it's kind of like it's a different part of your brain that is seeking satisfaction. So it's a slower intimacy. So it's kind of like when you take, I don't know, an hour to go and get the ingredients for your meal, and you've really like carefully chosen them. And then you go and you cut them and you listen to the sounds as you cut it and fry it. And then you put it on your plate and it's really beautiful, and you slowly eat it and take it all in. And that is sensual intimacy. There's this kind of slowness and satisfaction, and it might take you like a little bit longer to get there when you're really hungry. And it may be easier to go down the other route, which again, both of them have their own places. I think both of them are very important, but they feed different parts of our brain, I think, in terms of, and our bodies, in terms of the types of intimacy that we need. And then we have this human brain, right? Our brainstem evolves into this human, logical, critical thinking brain, which has allowed us to evolve quicker and more efficiently than other species from mammals. And that part of our brain, I think, really likes the emotional intimacy, like the mind sex. You know, there's that Dead Prez song, Mind Sex. It's wonderful. If you haven't heard it, go and listening to it. It's beautiful. And that really speaks to the intimacy from the mind, and being heard and seen and understood, and being able to be vulnerable and speak our truth, and to have that heard and listened to. So I feel like there's these kind of ladders of intimacy that I see correlated to the different parts of our brain. What do you think?
Yeah, I love what you said there about I'll go with the fast food. There's this there's like an animalistic part of us. Like I think when we do men's work, we often talk about the wild man for men. This wild, instinctive, animalistic part of us that would tear apart and fuck and eat and gorge on the world without a second thought. We'll just walk through the world very animalistically, and that part of men is often suppressed in this day and age. And one of the areas I think that comes out for a lot of men is sexually, because the lust is so powerful. As an energy, lust is so powerful, and it's so all-consuming for all of us, but I can really talk as a man and the men that I often speak to. And what I'm kind of sensing from you is that there's this sensuality which requires us to go from this kind of animalistic part, which isn't bad or wrong. It just simply exists and is part of us and has a use, and it keeps us alive, and it keeps us, when there's danger, when there's real danger, it has us be alert and so forth. But in our lives, to have a more elevated experience, a more scrumptious experience, we must pass that through like almost like a level of consciousness of like, oh, I'm feeling lust, or I'm feeling like I want food, but I'm going to consciously choose to take it slowly and savor the cooking of the meal, the chopping of the spices, the chopping of the chilies and the onions. And I'm going to mix it slowly. I'm going to feel, I'm going to really observe the texture of the sauce. And as I pour it onto my plate, I'm going to, beautifully put it down and admire it, and really take in the moment by moment beauty and pleasure and enjoyment, and then start eating and really take our time and being in that, and to bring more of that experience into our life, because we're not necessarily just talking about sex. We use the example of food there. Is a way of bringing
food is the metaphor, everyone. Food is the metaphor.
We can have this really deep experience of something that allows us to really savor it and enjoy it, and bring a sensuality to it, as one of my teachers would call it, like refined eroticism to it.
It's like fine food. It's like fine dining.
Yeah.
And you might not do that every day. Like you might not want to do that. Sometimes you might, just want wild animal intimacy. But sometimes it's also really nice to have all that prep and to really be in that moment where I think a lot of the clients that come to the School of Sensual Arts as well have this similar to me, how I was experienced, just couldn't get out of the mind. And I think what sensual experiences do is just allow us to, again, to just drop out of the mind and really be with this deeply satisfying this deeply satisfying experience for the whole body, because it's tapping into different objects of the meditative practice, whether that is food or sex or whatever it is. It's just a different restaurant, you know. It's just a different restaurant.
Yeah, it allows us to get out of the mind, because this is also a thing. And I imagine, as you said, a lot of the men and women that come to you to work with you is like, people really struggle to get out of their heads, and especially in general life in general, right? But I think the place that it probably pains people one of the most, not complete the most, is in sex, because you're in this experience and you know this could be really beautiful. We have this innate feeling of like, this could be really wonderful. I'm with someone I'm attracted to, and with this person who I could really feel something for. And I'm thinking about my work, and I'm thinking about my fears, I'm thinking about my worries, I'm thinking about, you know, what I need to do next week. And we experience that as detracting from the moment. We know that it's taking away from the pleasure that's really just on the plate in front of us.
Yeah, and I think when that happens, when we've got all those things happening in our heads, that's when sex can become a bit of a dumping ground for our emotions as well. And it's like, I don't know how to get this out or express it or to work through it, so I'm just going to ejaculate it, and maybe that will make me feel better for a while, you know. And actually then our partner's bodies can become these dumping grounds for our emotions. And that's why, like, energetic attunement before practices, make sure you're both kind of, you don't have to be on the same page, but, you know, you're feeling like you're in a place that you want to give and take, whatever that dance is for you, because there's emotions at play, there's stress at play, and I think a healthy amount of stress is good in sex as well, right? Because if we didn't have stress in our bodies, we would be a puddle on the floor. So a certain amount is great, but it's being able to titrate that, I think, and be able to not use it as a dumping ground is what I'm trying to say. And actually, I think, this is making me think about, you know, in body work, a really taboo subject, I think, across men is the prostate. And I have a wonderful teacher who says that he's worked with thousands and thousands and thousands of bodies, alive bodies, not dead bodies, in body work, in a format of emotional detox. So using massage to detox emotions from the body, using meridians and things like that. And he says that actually 80% of the trauma in a man's body lives in the prostate, and it's such a deeply repressed part of the male anatomy. And actually a constant kind of need or urge to ejaculate happens because where the semen has to pass through the prostate before ejaculating, it actually massages and releases some of the stress, trauma, anxiety that we may be holding in that area. So sometimes the need for sex is actually a need to express and to release and to work through and to heal deep emotions and stress and anxiety and emotions that we may have stored in our bodies. And so that's just something I think that I thought I'd throw out there, because I think it's not spoken about a lot. And I think that there's so much shame in the prostate. And if we just saw all of our body exactly the same as the rest of our body, then we would start to see a huge decrease in things like prostate cancer, which is completely on the rise as well, because, again, so much shame lives in our bums. So, yeah. So I think it's worth mentioning. And if as I say that as a listener, if that starts to bring up feelings of like, oh no, I wouldn't do that, that's a bit out there, then that's also something to kind of be curious about and to think about and to play with. Yeah, and hearing that doesn't
really surprised me, because in working with men, I see what happens to a lot of men is that when they're experiencing stress or worry or anxiety, or they're feeling overworked, they often go to regular masturbation, ejaculation, to alleviate that to some degree, whether that is to get to sleep, whether that's just in the middle of the day because they're feeling the tension in their body. They literally feel the emotional tension build up and they're wanting to release some of that just so they can kind of get on. And I see that as a really, very, very commonly actually in men, is that I speak to them and they're like, oh, I'm using porn multiple times a day. I'm masturbating multiple times a day. And then they're like, I don't know what to do. And then you talk to them and you're like, oh, there's this deep sense of anxiety or fear or stress that they're feeling, not just from their present life, but that's been there through a long lineage of through their lives where they've been holding on to this stress. And as men, we do have this fear around the prostate, around our bums being dark, especially anything being inserted in our bum, because we've come from this idea. And I think what I think men often have is the fear of being gay for straight men is incredibly strong, is one. And another fear I see with men, often as straight men, is like the fear of being aroused by or in the presence of another man. And that kind of comes up. Those two things are slightly different, but it's like men have this deep fear of like, if I enjoy someone massaging my prostate, for instance, right, from inside my anus, what does that mean about me? What does that mean about my sexual desires? Does that mean that I'm in some way impure or that I desire to sleep with men? And on the other side, with the fear about being aroused in the presence of being other men, with men, I see men really worried about if they see another man naked or another man sees them naked. Because if I'm aroused and another man is present and he's naked too, does that mean that man aroused me? And if I got aroused by that man, what does that mean about me? Does that mean I'm gay? And I've had many conversations with men about this in men's groups and also in my private work, because we're just, so many of the messages we get, especially men who are probably kind of 30s, 40s and upwards, of what it meant to be gay, or if we come from particular religions, for instance, it really weighs heavily. And the shame that you speak of there around the prostate, like it's just this shame we hold around our own sexuality, you know, our own kind of pleasure centers and the places where we can really experience a lot of pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's incredible, actually. You know, we've talked a lot about mirrors, different mirrors in this conversation. And actually, when we start to come up against those mirrors that can come up when you start to think about different areas of the body, the prostate, for example, and we actually see, where is this coming from? Is this mine? Is this fear? Is this fear because I think this, or is this fear because of what others think or what it will mean? It's really interesting to play with that. And also how, you know, when we start to come up against our edges and our boundaries, that can actually be a very interesting way to cultivate sexual energy, because you actually start to move through barriers in the mind and you start to return to the body and titrate between what's allowed and what's not allowed. You know, everyone finds that exciting, don't they? But also, when you go in a bit deeper, quite literally, you'll find that the prostate is also the seat of the male G-spot as well. And I think if anyone said to me, if somebody, you know, touched your G-spot, then it would mean this and you could never do it, I'd go, well, that would change the entire experience. You know, that's just a no go. So it's kind of sad, actually, that men's bodies have been taken from experiencing their G-spots because of the shame and the fear that is placed around that area, that comes from the mind and that comes from society. So I find deep sadness in that.
Yeah. I often say what we really need. We've had this beautiful movement of sexual liberation for women, you know, which, you know, and that's caused a lot of women to flock towards Tantra. And what we really need for the world to really change, especially relationships and sexuality, is a liberation of men Because I think there's this idea that men are very confident sexually, and because many men are going towards sex and taking action and so forth. But what I see from the men I speak to and I work with and I see in groups, and maybe you echo the same thing, is actually men are really quite suppressed sexually. You know, we live in a very tight, narrow band of like how we're allowed to show up sexually, which, you know, as for example, you know, we aren't comfortable to massage our own prostate or have someone else massage that for ourselves because of what the societal meaning or what we've taken as what we should be, what is manly and not manly. And I really think there's a, and I think it's occurring, but there's really space for this sexual revolution for men to really empower them both, you know, sexually, relationally, so that women can truly be free, especially obviously heterosexual women, because as I've said to many women, it's like, you can't have this free, liberated sex until the man you're with can also be with you and hold you, have the consciousness and awareness to be with that higher, more refined level of sensuality.
Yeah. I think we really rise together. I feel like sometimes we do the work in partnership, right? If we're in a couple, we might do the work as partners, but sometimes we might be on our own journey. We might be doing a lot of that work for ourselves. But I do sometimes see a correlation of if one partner is really, really working on their sexual energy and understanding their body and self-loving and acceptance and working through the repressed stuff, that there is often this kind of natural rise that happens with the partner that they're with, maybe at a different pace, but I do see a correlation between that. So sometimes I think in couples work, a partner can feel stuck because they're like, oh, I want to do this work, but my partner doesn't want to do this work. So this is it. This is me now. This is my life. Our sex life is going to suck forever. I'll never be intimate. But actually, we can really start that work on ourselves and actually see that as we start to do that, as we start to open the doors in ourselves, we open the doors for our partners too, because we start to accept parts of ourselves, we start to accept parts of them. And yeah, there's this another mirror. I feel like this is the topic of our unconscious topic of our conversation, David. We start to pull up another mirror, that happens through doing the work for yourself too. So yeah, I think we don't need to wait. And energy speaks. Energy, especially from the heart, it's 60 times stronger than it is from the brain. So if you're working on your heart energy, then those around you are going to feel that, and they're going to start to come onto a similar wavelength, I think, too.
And I think of as you say that, I think of kind of Shiva and Shakti, you know, the how they come together in such a, you know, wonderful union. So I think sometimes we, in this modern world, like we've come to this point with men and women and even the masculine and feminine, it's like war. It's war. It's like we've forgotten that actually we're not meant to be at war. We're meant to be in union with one another for this continual elevation and evolution.
Yeah.
For us to move to higher states of consciousness and expression and energy, depending how you want to look at things. But there's a coming together that really is needed, is being invited in to us internally, into our internal energies, but also into the world around us.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite deity figures is Ardhaneshwari, and it means like half man, half woman, and it's basically the union of half Shiva and half Shakti. And I love that as a figure because I think it personifies for me even more that it's not about only being masculine, it's not about only being feminine, but it's about uniting both of those qualities inside ourselves and allowing ourselves to find that polarity and balance and dance of those two energies within ourselves, no matter what body we're in. And I love that because I think the world needs more feminine in men, and I think more masculine in females, and the dance of both of those two are so repressed again. So I'm here for it. I'm really here for us all just forgetting what we should be and coming into what we are and what we want to be, and being able to play with that and explore it more freely. So we had a beautiful dance today with the deities, haven't we? The deities and bumholes and mirrors and senses, and a beautiful conversation.
Yeah, because it's both like, spiritual and esoteric, but also all of those things are very real in our lives. They're very real parts of us that sometimes we will shame and neglect and not want to pay attention to, because we have these, so much of the stories and ideas we have about things are not from us. No, they don't come from us. We were told them, and we often hold them so dearly as truth. Like, this is how it is, and we will defend it. And when asked, like, why do we think this is the truth? It's like, that's just how it is. But, really, that's not who we are. As you said there, it's like we can have the opportunity to allow those mental, spiritual ideas to kind of fall away, and then experience ourselves and others as they really are, in the dance of intimacy and connection and sensuality.
Yeah, and I feel like it's, we don't have to give up the identity of who we are. We can still be, I don't know, you can still do your job, you can still live in your house, you can still be called by your name. You don't need to change your name to like a spiritual name. You can still be all of what you are and something else. And I think that's really what expansion boils down to. It's being with what you are and being able to expand and play with what else is out there. And there's great joy in that freedom. There's great joy in that exploration. And there's great release from the pressures of sticking to who we are and what we think that should be.
Yes. I feel that feels like a really perfect way to start to wrap up the conversation. What a joy, what a wonderful joy to speed through this conversation. The time always flies, and you're having a beautiful conversation about topics that you really love to discuss and weave in and out of. And I imagine the listeners are wanting to know where they can learn more about you, where they can join the School of Sensual Arts, and what else you have going on. I know you have a book coming out soon, from what the world tells me as well.
Yeah, I do. Thank you so much, David, for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I can't believe an hour has flown by. I've really, really loved talking to you. And yes, my book, Sensual, will be out. It's going to be out for pre-order on the 29th of Feb, and it will be out on May the 21st, I believe. So this year, 2024. And that's a book which explores very much like we have in this conversation, some of the philosophical frameworks of Tantra, some of my own story, some of the practices, some of the mythologies around sensuality and how it can be this really beautiful life path for us all. And yeah, you can find me at the School of Sensual Arts, and we share Tantra yoga as a weekly practice online in beautiful community. We have monthly circles, and if you're looking, I guess, for Tantra in relation, then we have our tantric date nights as well, which are a really beautiful, playful way to experience what we've been talking about. So yeah, and finally our sensual education series, that's 5 masterclasses, just sharing all the things that I think I wish we had all learned sooner about sensuality and practices, and again, philosophy and theory and all of that stuff as well too. So yeah, and you can find me on Instagram. I'm often taboo busting and being beaten down by the algorithm there. So you can find me at henika.x. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. And I will put all those links down into the show notes, listeners. So if you're looking for any of those will be contained in there. Yeah, thank you. What a wonderful conversation. And, it's always so joyful to talk about Tantra beyond the sex, beyond the kind of the sex and the as I've come to know, the kind of Bali Tantra flowy women that exist. I have nothing against, but I know that there's more to Tantra than that. So it's been so beautiful to talk about more of the classic, the authentic elements of Tantra with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And listeners, hope you enjoyed the episode. If you've enjoyed this episode, let us know. Reach out. You've got our links and the place to find us. It's always really beautiful to hear what people have taken and learned from the episode. But until next week, I'll say ciao, ciao. I want to say a big thank you for listening. You know, it's people like yourself that really help get the podcast out into the world. You know, especially if you're often sharing the episodes and the podcast with people that you feel just could do with listening, right? Can see a different way of being a man, maybe a different way of having dating lives and intimacy and relationships. So I want to say a big thank you. And if maybe after listening to this episode, you think, oh, there's someone actually who could really do with this, please share it with them. You know, share the love. I'm really, really grateful. And if, you know, you want to get in contact with me for any questions, or you want to talk about coaching or any working together, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at theauthenticman_, or you can email me hello@theauthenticman.net. Thank you very much.